Hey gorehounds, sequels suck. Alien is a cool movie, right? Well, I just watched the sequel and it sucked! Friday the 13th Part 2 should have sucked as well. Some of the major elements and talent that made the original Friday the 13th so successful were absent from Part 2. Original director Sean Cunningham passed on Friday Part 2 to first-time director Steve Miner. A new writer was brought in for the story, and special effects artist Tom Savini chose to work on the burning instead. Character-wise, they pretty much had to start from scratch too. Pamela Voorhees is dead, so a new antagonist needs to be introduced, which is very risky. Imagine if Michael Myers wasn't in a Halloween movie. Oh no. Oh no! Most of the original characters are dead too, so now you need a whole new cast. With so many changes in front and behind the camera, the only thing the two movies have in common is Crystal Lake. And Part 2 doesn't even start there! Friday Part 2 starts... I don't even know where the fuck the movie starts. But anyway, we see Alice from Friday Part 1, so I'm assuming it's far away from Crystal Lake as possible. If I survived the first movie, I'd live as far away as I could. Alice is dreaming about the events of the first movie, which also acts as a recap for the audience. Maybe we're going to continue her story. Oh no. Now, as cool as it is, there's a lot of things that bother me about this opening sequence. First, the recap is too long. It's nearly 6 minutes long, and for a movie with a runtime of only around 1 hour 20 minutes, that's around 4.8% of the movie. Now I'm starting to feel ripped off. Second, why introduce a character from the previous movie only to kill her off in the opening minutes? I'll tell you why. Because they wanted to replicate the early kills from the original, and to show that it was Jason doing the killing, as only he would really want to kill Alice in revenge. Alice killed Jason's mother, so it makes sense that Jason would want revenge and kill Alice. And on first viewing, there's not really a problem with this. For all we know, Jason is an investment banker from New York, whose business card sucks. He could make a few calls, find out where Alice was staying, and then plan the murder.
Hey, Paul!
But later we find out that Jason is some sack-wearing freak who lives in a gone-wrong IKEA shed in the middle of nowhere. And that raises a whole shackload of questions. Questions like, how did Jason find Alice? Did he look her up in the yellow pages? Can he even read? How did he get there? Did he take the bus? Was Freddy Krueger driving the bus? Did any of the other passengers notice the stink of a severed human head and call the cops? It would have made more sense for Jason's character that Alice comes back to Crystal Lake. Maybe to warn the new counselors about what happened to her, but then that still leaves the problem of needing an early kill, so I understand why they went down this route. The movie opened in theaters just under a year after the original, so that didn't leave a lot of time to iron out these little issues in the script. Why bring the head? Maybe he brought his mum's head along so that she could watch him get revenge on Alice or something. How did nobody spot this huge freak bounding around the place with a severed human head? But at least he keeps it in the fridge to keep her from stinking up the place. Why take the kettle off the boil? Alice is already dead. Who cares if the house burns down? If anything, it might help cover your tracks. Let the kettle boil over, brah! After the revenge-style opening, we soon get back to more familiar territory and see some of the new characters arrive at Crystal Lake. But this time at the new nearby camp called Packanack. I'd like to get my hands on those Packanacks. I see a lot of potential in these new characters. There's a strong, smart female in new final girl, Ginny. A positive attitude disabled guy.
Is it permanent?
Doctor thinks so. I don't.
A black guy who goes to the bar and doesn't die. Later in the night, new counselor boss Paul scares the counselors with the story of Camp Crystal Lake and a prank. He then gets cozy with Ginny in the cabin and we get to the next kill, which is another character from the first movie, Crazy Ralph. Crazy Ralph was a red herring in the previous movie, but here he's quickly dispatched to let the audience know that it's not a murder mystery this time, and that it's definitely Jason doing the killing. And what a risky kill this is! I mean, there's people right behind you! The following morning, the counselors all go out to do some training, which apparently involves running around and barbecuing. We see two of the counselors sneak off to go snoop around the now shut Camp Crystal Lake. We then hear the famous motive which was used in the original to signal when Pamela was near. But if you think about it, it doesn't really make sense that it's used for Jason, as it was originally Jason's own voice in Pamela's head telling her to kill.
Kill her, Mommy. Kill her.
But if you listen carefully, a lot of the time you can only hear the part, which means kill, so it could just be a voice in his head telling him to kill. Maybe they took out the part for the rest of the movie too, as it's not really applicable. The trespassers don't get too far before they're spotted by a cop and then brought back to Camp Packanack. On his way out of Packanack, the cop spots a figure running across the road. This is the moment we first see Jason Voorhees fully on screen, and while he's different from the classic character most people are familiar with, it's still an important moment for the franchise and horror history. It's also the only time Jason actively runs away from somebody, although he may well be ignoring the cop or luring him in to make the kill. Special effects artist Tom Savini said he didn't want to do the sequel because he didn't get how Jason would be fully grown and opted to work on The Burning instead.
They offered me part 2, and then I got the script, and Jason is running around. I thought, what are you doing? There is no Jason.
And he's sort of right. It doesn't really make sense that Jason would be fully grown in the 5 years difference between the movies. Things are complicated further when Paul explains that Alice was killed only 2 months after the events of the first movie.
The girl who survived that night at Camp Blood, that Friday the 13th, she claimed she saw. She disappeared 2 months later.
So that would mean that Jason grew from a kid to an adult in 2 months. Did McDonald's release a new milkshake in the 80s? However, things start to make a lot more sense though if you view Alice's first encounter with Jason as a dream or delusion brought on by trauma. Let me explain. At the start of the original Friday, Pamela kills the counselors who didn't look after Jason, and that happened in 1958. So let's say Jason was around 10 years old when he supposedly drowned. So 22 years pass from 1958 to 1980 when the first movie takes place, which would make Jason around 32 years old when he saw his mother die. Part 2 is set 5 years from Part 1.
5 years. 5 long years.
Which would make Jason around 37, which now explains why he's fully grown. And why he runs like an old man. Back to the story. The cop decides to give chase and ends up finding a spooky rundown shack in the middle of the woods. He goes inside to search and we get another kill when Jason sneaks up from behind. Whilst it's not my favourite Jason look, I still like Sackboy Jason because the look fits in with the story. He's out in the woods surviving and scavenging, so it's realistic that the sack would be found in that environment. It also matches his overall aesthetic, from his worn clothes to his cobbled together house. It's just something he found and threw on over his head to hide his face. Back at Packanack, half the counselors leave to go to a local bar, and the other half stay behind. Sweet Cheeks takes a swim, and this sleazy looking guy plays a prank on her by taking all of her clothes. But the tables are quickly turned when he steps into a trap set by Jason. Sweet Cheeks goes off in search of a knife to cut him down, but Jason's machete gets to him first and we rack up another kill. When Sweet Cheeks returns, we get the lamest kill of the movie so far, the dreaded off-screen death. At the bar, Jeannie talks to Paul about Jason and how she sort of feels sorry for him because he saw his mum get decapitated. One of the strong points of Friday Part 2 is that the characters seem a little better defined, especially final girl Ginny. At the bar scene, we see her use her psychology training to try and see things from Jason's perspective. They're also some of the most likable characters in the series. Ginny is a fan favorite and definitely one of the best final girls the series has to offer. The couple that want to explore Camp Crystal Lake are relatable. Remember when you were a kid and you just want to explore that old abandoned house in the neighborhood, or just sneak around somewhere you shouldn't? This girl doesn't care that this guy's disabled, she just wants to get with him. And he's a positive guy who's not going to let a disability get in his way. Paul's also a cool boss who will joke around, but he's got your back when you get in trouble. So back at Packanack, the girl with the huge Packanackers goes upstairs with AC/DC, and the other girl leaves Wheels to spray some alcohol-based perfume on her crotch. When Wheels goes to look for her, we get the most iconic kill of the movie. It's good to know that Jason doesn't discriminate and that he's an equal opportunity serial killer. Right after Wheels gets killed, Jason scores his first twofer when he stabs Packanackers and AC/DC together with one spear. Now's as good a time as any to talk about the kills in Friday Part 2. The kill count is the same as the original with 9 kills, but I feel that Tom Savini's absence is definitely noticed. The gore effects are less elaborate and more brief, but whilst the majority of kills are some of the weaker ones of the series, there's still a few standout moments, with these last 2 being amongst the best. Although I feel the double kill could have been done with some more detail. They should have shown the arrow actually thrusted into the victims, and maybe even a shot of Jason twisting it with them screaming out in pain. I mean, that's what happened when I found that couple in bed. They just wouldn't stop screaming! So anyway, the perfume crotch girl comes back to take a ride on Wheels, and we get a good jump scare when Jason surprises her and cuts her. She can't run because her crotch stings so much, so Jason makes the kill with no resistance. Ginny and Paul then return from the bar, and the others make the most sensible decision of their lives and keep on drinking. Not only did they have a great time, they escaped death. When Ginny and Paul arrive in the cabin, there's a cool moment when Jason is lurking in the shadows. He nearly stabs Paul with the pitchfork, but Ginny warns him in time and the two end up in a tussle. Jason gets the upper hand, of course, and knocks Paul out, and then proceeds to chase after Ginny. We then get a long cat and mouse sequence, reminiscent of the original Friday, but there's definitely more jump scares here. Jason leaps up out of the dark, then he smashes through a window. When Ginny makes a run for the car, he pops up at the window, then stabs a pitchfork through the roof. There's also a great tense sequence in the cabin when Ginny is hiding under the bed. She nearly gets away with it, but a rat knocks over a bottle of apple juice. Jason sees the apple juice and he sets up a surprise attack that doesn't go to plan. Then Ginny runs deep into the forest until she comes across Jason's cabin that we saw earlier on, and she makes a horrific discovery, a gruesome shrine dedicated to his dead mother. In my previous video, I mentioned that the original Friday the 13th took some musical inspiration from Psycho, while Part 2 looks to have taken some elements of the story as well, mainly the way Norman Bates keeps the remains of his mother. Both killers believe that their mothers are still alive, and whilst Norman actually takes on the persona of his mother, Jason hears voices and takes instructions from her instead. Jason then breaks through the door, and Ginny uses her quick wits and psychology training to trick Jason into thinking that she is his mother. She puts on the old sweater, hides in front of the decapitated head, and instructs Jason that his job is done. The ruse nearly works, but Jason gets a glimpse of his real mother's head and realizes it's a trick. He attacks Ginny with a pickaxe, but Paul rushes in and tackles Jason again, but this time Ginny helps out and finishes Jason off with a pickaxe blow. Ginny and Paul then triumphantly return to camp, where Jason makes a final maskless appearance for a final jump scare that, unlike the original, is completely expected. Despite most of the kills and action taking place in the last third of the movie, Friday the 13th Part 2 still feels well paced. There's enough going on to keep us interested until the roller coaster end. Everything builds nicely to the final showdown, and it's one of the most tense and satisfying in the series. My only niggle is that maybe Jason should have lost his mask for the final confrontation with Ginny. It would have changed his look for the last part of the movie, and let's be honest, we spent the whole time wondering what he looks like under there anyway, so why waste the cool makeup just for the brief final jump scare? And speaking of the final jump scare, it doesn't even compete with the original. I think it's mainly down to the camera framing. It's a little too focused on that window, so you're already bracing yourself for something to happen. The fake out with the dog was a good idea, and I think if you just reframed the shot, then this scene could have worked very well. The script makes the obvious move of making Jason the killer this time. He's the only original character mentioned in part 1 that's left to do anything with. But it's smart enough to add some depth to the mother and son dynamic and adds more to the mythology of the series. It smartly ditches the murder mystery elements of the first movie and lets the audience know that Jason is here, and he's pissed.
But I'm gonna give it to you straight about Jason.
New director Steve Miner does a great job of capturing the feel of the first movie whilst giving it a slightly more polished look, which was probably helped by the bigger budget. So in the end, Friday the 13th Part 2 overcame the bad sequel odds, and not only was it successful again at the box office, it's also one of the overall better movies of the franchise. Some fans even prefer it over the original, and it also sets up Jason to become one of the most popular icons in horror history, but he's not quite there yet. There's the tricky third installment to contend with. So Gorehounds, is Friday the 13th Part 2 terrorific? You bet your cheap ass wooden chair it is.